Hello dear friends, you're watching the Ruslan Belov channel, and today we'll be discussing the situation in Ukraine as of June 26, 2025. A large number of developments have taken place today, so let's dive right in. In this video, we'll briefly cover the results of the NATO summit that concluded yesterday. We'll also walk along the front line of the special military operation. Over the past 24 hours, Russian forces have significantly improved their positions in certain areas. So let's proceed step by step. We begin with the results of the NATO summit, and today we are already seeing the first assessments in various media. For example, the German newspaper Bild reported that this was the worst NATO summit for Zelensky and Ukraine. That's because the summit didn't result in any major statements or specific positions in the final declaration blaming Russia for anything in particular. Most importantly, this was one of the few NATO summits where Ukraine received absolutely nothing. Not a cent in financial support, no new arms deliveries, and no announcements of fresh military aid packages. This is a very serious signal to Zelensky. However, on the other hand, NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte stated today that NATO is still prepared to support and supply Ukraine with everything it needs for another 10 years. In other words, NATO is confident it can continue supporting Ukraine, at least at the current level, for the next decade. No one is claiming this support will be sufficient to help Ukraine regain the borders of 1991. But for conducting the current hostilities, NATO is indeed capable of providing the necessary backing. Meanwhile, there are reports that Zelensky held a conversation with Trump, and based on some brief excerpts from that talk, Zelensky said he wants to find a path to peace. So on the one hand, Ukraine and NATO are apparently prepared to fight for decades. Yet on the other hand, Zelensky clearly understands that it's uncertain what will even be left of Ukraine in the coming decades if the war continues. Thus, he is still looking for ways to end the conflict. Now let's move to the front line. Interestingly, the conclusion of the NATO summit coincided with the end of a certain Ukrainian counteroffensive, which we've been discussing for the past few days. Today, Syrsky announced that this counteroffensive was relatively successful for Ukraine, and that, as a result, the front line in Sumy Oblast has been fully stabilized. That was his brief statement today. But if we look at the situation on the ground, we can somewhat disagree with Syrsky's optimism. First of all, there have been noticeable adjustments along the front, and interesting commentary has come in from people claiming direct connections with Russian troops currently involved in the offensive. Let me remind you that during the Ukrainian counteroffensive in Sumy, the armed forces of Ukraine managed to regain partial control of the village of Andriivka. This small advancement seems to be the basis for Syrsky's claim that the front is now fully stabilized. However, today we have the first objective footage showing Russian forces establishing full fire control over the main supply routes and forest belts, connecting second and first line defensive positions, where Russian troops are already present. We can see that the area is tightly monitored, and most of the heavy strikes are now concentrated south of Andriivka, particularly around the villages of Pisarivka and Malakochakivka. So even if some Ukrainian units remain in Andriivka, Russia is now doing everything possible to cut off their supply lines. Looking at the map, it appears Ukraine has only one remaining usable forest corridor to send reinforcements toward Andriivka, which Syrsky called stabilization. But again, Russian forces are targeting those very routes with precision strikes. Meanwhile, a Russian flanking operation is unfolding east of this area around the village of Vorochniny. Vorochnina and Yunakivka represent the first line of defense still under Ukrainian control. In Vorochnin, Russian units are advancing from Alexiivka, trying to encircle the village from the south and southwest to attack Ukrainian positions from the rear. This will likely force Ukrainian troops to retreat toward the forested area to the south. So despite Syrsky's statement, Russian forces appear poised to continue their advance, and further adjustments to the front line are expected soon. As for Yunakivka, some pro-Russian experts claim that Ukraine's ability to offer organized resistance there has been completely broken. According to these sources, who claim to have ground-level intel, Russian troops are now completing the clearing of the southern part of Yunakivka. Just yesterday, footage emerged showing Ukrainian forces blowing up a key central bridge in Yunakivka, which we discussed. That likely marked the beginning of their retreat. Ukrainian forces appear to have shifted focus to destroying logistics infrastructure to prevent Russian control of these key transport routes. Yesterday's bridge demolition and today's reports of Russia clearing the southern part of the village seem to confirm that the events are logically unfolding step by step. Now let's move to the Kharkiv front, where intriguing developments have been reported from the Vovchansk sector in northeastern Kharkiv Oblast. There have been notable videos published over the past 48 hours. Just yesterday, some pro-Russian Telegram channels released a clip showing Russian drones tracking Ukrainian soldiers attempting to dig in beneath a railroad bridge over the Vovcha River on the western side of Vovchansk. We can clearly see Ukrainian soldiers trying to set up basic trenches and strongpoints. Interestingly, this is the first time since the fighting for Vovchansk began that Ukraine has attempted to fortify positions along the Vovcha River, specifically near the railroad bridge. Today's footage clarifies the situation. It appears Ukraine has obtained intel suggesting that Russia may soon attempt to cross the Vovcha River and move westward into Vovchansk, potentially to capture a factory complex located there. Ukrainian territorial defense units were likely dispatched to dig in and prevent Russian forces from gaining a foothold near the bridge. However, a new video published by Ukrainian sources today shows fragments from various settlements along the front. In one notable clip, we see Russian troops moving across open terrain toward the railway, observed by Ukrainian FPV drone operators, who then launch strikes against them. That short clip shows Russian stormtroops crossing the Vovcha River near the railway, attempting to flank Ukrainian positions at the bridge. This raised several questions. Was this an attempt to prevent Ukrainian troops from entrenching in this zone and keeping it a grey area? Or was it a genuine attempt to cross the river and push southward toward western Vovchansk? We've received no further updates from this direction in the past few hours, so we await further developments. It's possible that, in the coming days, we'll see first-person video confirmation of Russian control over western Vovchansk, particularly around the industrial zone. If this happens, we can confidently say that Russia has entered the final phase of the battle for Vovchansk, with the goal of fully clearing the settlement and possibly continuing south toward Vovcha and eventually the Pecheneg Reservoir. We'll continue monitoring this sector closely and keep the memory of this small but important Russian operation in mind. According to these adjustments, Russian forces continue to encircle the settlement of Kolodyarzy from the north and northwest. In the near future, the settlement may be cut off from supply lines coming from the south, potentially triggering further movement and adjustments in the area. However, this is not the same pace of advance we witnessed a few months ago. Moving to the Constantinople direction, the main fighting is unfolding in the area of Chasiv Yar, as well as along the Siversky-Donets-Donbas Canal. Regarding Chasiv Yar itself, today we have new objective control footage confirming the almost complete clearing of the settlement. More precisely, its Shevchenko micro-district. Fighting in this part of the front is winding down. Today, another 1 to 1.5% of Chasiv Yar's territory came under Russian control. We're now only days, not months, away from the full capture of the settlement. Roughly 40% of Shevchenko and a few other neighborhoods in the southwest remain under Ukrainian control, namely Yuzhne, Zemlyanka, and Workshop Number 2. Comparing maps from various cartographers, some of these areas are already partially marked under Russian control, though without precise geolocation confirmation. There are also reports of Russian advances along the canal, with cartographers making adjustments based on local sources present at the combat zones. Of interest on the Konstantinivka axis are the ongoing battles along the Kryvyi Torets River, as well as around the railway between Novorodske and Konstantinivka. Today, Russian forces made a small advance toward the M05-16 road, specifically toward a large Ukrainian stronghold located alongside the road. Objective footage shows Ukrainian units countering Russian saboteurs and assault groups using drones. According to this footage, Ukraine managed to repel the latest attack. But overall, the trend is clear. Russian forces are determined to seize these key strongpoints. If this Russian offensive succeeds, it could complete the encirclement of Ukrainian troops positioned along the Kryvyi Torets River and the Novorodske-Konstantinivka railway. That includes Novospasivka, Sherbinivka, Katarinivka, and Klibanbek. As for the southern part of the Klibanbek Reservoir, there were no recorded changes in the past 24 hours. However, there was another episode of Russian FPV drone activity along the H20 highway, proving that the northwestern or western lid of the Kleban bike cauldron is effectively sealed. Russian drones are actively targeting this road, making it nearly impossible for any vehicles to pass. Ukrainian sources themselves report that, in many areas along the front, troops must walk the final 5 kilometers under artillery and drone fire. In areas with distances of just 2.5 to 3 kilometers, any vehicle is immediately destroyed by Russian drones. Now we move toward the H32 highway, where the main fighting is centered around Nova Economichna. For several days in a row, there has been heavy use of Geran-type drones along the front line. It appears this direction is being tested. According to Western and Russian analysts, by September, Russia may be capable of producing up to 700 Geran drones daily. At present, the average usage ranges from 80 to 350 per day. If that ramps up to 700, it would be double the peak usage we're seeing now. These drones are used both for deep strikes into Ukrainian territory and for distracting Ukrainian air defenses. But now we see them being used directly along the front. One such strike occurred over Nova Economichna. During reconnaissance, a temporary Ukrainian deployment site was identified, possibly inside a former school or large building. This site was then attacked from multiple angles by Geran drones. In general, Russian FAB bombs and aviation are very active in this sector, and all supply routes are under Russian fire control. It seems Russia is finalizing preparations for a direct assault on Nova Economichna. Footage from the settlement shows Russian drones on fiber optic lines destroying all vehicles attempting to use the H32 highway toward the front. This area appears fully prepared for an assault. Likely the current objective is to exhaust Ukrainian forces with drone strikes. Once resupply is no longer possible, Russia may initiate storming operations, possibly in the near future. Next, we move to the Dnipro and southern Donetsk directions. Here, Russian troops are slowly advancing toward Encircle. Today we began receiving drone footage showing Russian forces and FPV operators moving westward after clearing Yalta and Zaporizhia. Now drones are flying over Encircle, identifying Ukrainian positions. There is a high probability that Encircle will come under Russian control within 2 to 3 days. Defending this area is difficult, as every square kilometer is under observation and fire. But the most important and noteworthy updates today come from the Zaporizhia direction. Russian forces have completely cleared the village of Shevchenko, and published footage shows artillery preparation, close combat, objective control footage of Russian soldiers in multiple parts of the settlement, Russian flags being raised in 3 locations, west, center, and north of Shevchenko. Based on this footage, the entire village has now been marked under Russian control. Yesterday, even pro-Ukrainian cartographers from Deep State acknowledged that Shevchenko was already 90% under Russian control. Today, geolocated confirmations back that up. Some mappers have even begun marking areas west of Shevchenko, including several forest belts and strongholds. We also see movement south of Volnypol, in the direction of Kamyshevaka and Novoyehorivka. Taken together, these updates suggest that a breakthrough of Ukrainian defenses may have occurred. Russian forces now appear to be advancing northwest toward Velika Mikhailivka at an increased pace. Fighting continues around the Huliaipol perimeter, and some cartographers have now marked 50% of Malinivka under Russian control. It's likely we'll soon see Russian flags raised there, and an official confirmation may follow from the Ministry of Defense. Another key area to watch is the Zaporizhia sector. Just yesterday we discussed heavy Russian air and artillery strikes on Kamensk and Stepnohursk, with almost every square meter of those towns hit by shelling. The density and spread of geolocated strikes led us to conclude that Russia was preparing another offensive, though it was unclear whether the goal was a full push north or just a tactical gain at the front line. Today, June 26th, that picture has become clearer. Some cartographers, including pro-Ukrainian ones, are now updating their maps. They report that Russian troops have reached the Yancharak River, a small stream flowing southeast from Kamensk toward Lobkov. Russian forces have made notable progress in this zone, and their immediate goal seems to be securing the area south of the river. Whether they plan to cross it remains unclear. For now, the focus seems to be clearing the southern bank, possibly followed by regrouping. After that, we may again see airstrikes resume, paving the way for an assault on the northern part of Kamensk.